do you really need to deadhead ornamental plants? In other words, chop off the spent flowers. Well, the impact of not deadheading will differ depending on the species, but as a general rule, if you want your plants to be tidier, bushier, and flower more strongly, then yes, deadhead.
When is the best time to transplant a plant? Generally speaking, autumn is the best time because the soil is warm and that allows the roots to heal and the plants to get over the shock. But there are some exceptions. Camelias are a classic. They transplant best in the middle of winter, which often coincides with full bloom. It may seem weird, but that's when they transplant best. Now, the rule for transplanting anything is to give it a good soak the day before you move it. That means it's fully hydrated before you cut the roots.
Hardening off is a quirky gardening term, and it simply means where you move plants that you've been growing, seeds or cuttings, from the shade in stages out so they can take full sun. I've been growing these cuttings of salvia in the shade, and if I pop them straight out into the garden where they're going to grow, they might shrivel. You need to harden them off because they're quite tender at this stage. Do that by just putting them underneath the shade of a bush or a tree like a lemon, perfect. Leave them there for a week or so and then move them out into full sun because they'll be able to cope by that stage.
A common but important question, and that is, what is tip pruning? Well, in short, it's taking off the end growing shoot, which means you then get new growth coming from the nodes right beneath it. And that means more leaves and also more flowering sites.
When is the best time to divide salvias? Well, many perennials like salvias are best divided in late winter, early spring, just as the new growth is about to happen. And you can see that this salvia, Salvia leucantha, the Mexican sage, is just finishing flowering. And you can also see down the base of it, there's lots of new growth just about to happen. And that is the perfect time to start to divide the salvias.
A really common problem people have with climbing plants is that they end up rushing to the top of the structure and you end up with bare bones below. There is a solution and it starts at planting. Now, temptation would be to encourage the plant to rush to the top of the frame, but then you'll just end up with that growth up the top. Instead, I'm going to train it horizontally. So I'm going to pick the two best stems and actually tie them down. You could even peg them down. I've done this by pegging them to the ground with some tent pegs. And a little bit like a sphalia, what that does is it takes the energy out of a dominant bud and it actually shares it amongst all the buds along the stem, which means each of these stems will shoot, getting you nice coverage along the length of the fence. I'm just going to remove some of this extra growth in the middle because I want to push all that energy into those main stems. And as they grow away, these buds, I'm going to train them horizontally as well. And then I'm going to end up with great growth and coverage from the top to the bottom.
A constant query is in regards to grafted trees. I've got all this lush growth at the bottom, what do I do with it? Well, you've got to remember that you have two trees. Your fruiting or flowering tree at the top, as well as your vigorous rootstock at the base. And what's happening is that rootstock is starting to take over. And if left unchecked, you'll end up with a completely different tree. So grab your secateurs and take that new growth off at the base as close to the main stem as possible. And you should be right.
Sometimes on the program, you'll see me tease the roots of a plant before I put it in the ground. And other times, you won't. So when to do it and when not to. Well, let's have a look at this. You'll see here, the roots aren't at all bound up. There's plenty of room in the potting mix still, and this could go straight into the ground. But sometimes you'll notice with a more advanced plant that the roots can be very bound and all circling in the pot. And it's important then just to pull those apart gently so when it is planted, the roots will then spread out into the soil and the plant will become nice and strong. That's the reason.
Can I move a tree from the ground into a pot? Well, it really depends on the type of the tree. So probably you need to get some advice from your local nursery or garden centre. However, as a general rule, if it's a tree that's smaller than you and it's a deciduous tree, you could dig it up in winter when it's dormant and put it into a large pot, say like a wine barrel. If it's an evergreen tree, you need to know a bit about the variety, because many will transplant quite well if you move them and lift them in spring into a large pot. But some trees, like gum trees, don't like to be transplanted.
Do you need secateurs to prune? Well, it depends on what kind of wood you're dealing with. Soft tips can simply be pinched out. Laterals like this can be snapped off. But thicker wood, you'll need secateurs, and even thicker wood, you'll need a saw. But I've seen trees completely controlled by hand. Buds like this, snapped off, growth control.